Absolutely. Kia ora, he mihi mai o hake a koutou I tēnei ata, ko ai au. Ko Kamalani Tukāreri tōku ingoa, he ria no Ngāpuhi, Ngāti Whātua, Ngāti Mutunga, Ngai Tahu Hoki, he kaitaka wainga Māori ahau ki te whare wānanga o Waitaha, he mihi poto tēnei, engari he mihi kia koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, I am thrilled to welcome you all to the first session of the Repository event. I have the absolute privilege of introducing two remarkable speakers from local context. But before we dive in, just a quick note, since we're quite a large group attending online, if we could please put any questions into the chat, I think that way we'll be able to manage questions a little bit easier and we'll try to get those answered if you have any. Is that all good? Thumbs up? Ka pai. Awesome. So when I was prepping to try and figure out what I should say about these two amazing people, I was finding it difficult to sum up just the wealth of expertise and experience they have. They're truly remarkable, and we're so lucky to have them speak to us this morning. So first, I am delighted to introduce the amazing Dr. Janette Hamilton-Pearce. She is currently the Chief of Staff at Local Context. She brings over 21 years of experience working in information systems for Indigenous communities. Joining her is the brilliant Ashley Rojas, a skilled software and web developer managing the Local Context website and specializing in API integration of the hubs, labels, and notices in various digital infrastructures. So if you can't tell from what I've already said, it's hard to capture just the wealth of knowledge and mātauranga these two bring. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to them and they'll talk about their amazing work and maybe just a little bit more about themselves. Kia ora.
Kia ora Kamalani. Nā mihi atu ki a koe me tō kaimahi Anton, kia ora koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa, anei he, I'm just sharing. Just share. Kawai, you see that? Kawai? Yep. Kamalani, is it good? Kawa. Kia ora. Nā mihi atu ki a koutou katoa, tēnā koutou tuatahi, kei te mihi atu ki a koe Kat, te kai karakia, nā mihi atu ki a koe. Tuarua, nā mihi atu ki te manawhina o te Waipounamu, koe kaitahu, tēnā koutou katoa. Tuatoru, kei te mihi atu ki ngā rangatira o te wharewānanga o Waitaha, ko Anton rātou, ko Stuart, ko Kamalani, ko Juliet hoki. Mauri ora kia koutou. Tuawha, kia ora koutou ki a tātou katoa, mo te kaupapa nei o te roroheko e pāna ki ngā iwi katoa tēnā koutou. Tuarima, kei te mihi atu ki a koe Ashley, mo tō tautoko ki te kaupapa nei, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koe. O tira ko wai au, he uri ahau o te whana apanui, he Chief of Staff o Local Context ahau, ko Dr. Janette Hamilton-Pearce ahau. Nō reira, mauri ora. Ai, Kamalani, kia ora, thank you for the introduction. I live, work and play on my ancestral homelands of Te Whana Apanui on the east coast of the North Island of Aotearoa, a place called Waikawa. And I'm the Chief of Staff of Local Context, with background of 21 years or over or more in information systems for Indigenous peoples. That kaupapa found me. I didn't find it, it found me, because I love to tutu around with a whole lot of computers, which is why I got into this in the first place. But I really want to thank the University of Canterbury for letting us present today on supporting iwi rights and interest in data and repositories. I'm going to hand it over to Ashley to introduce herself.
Kia ora, everyone. Thank you, Lani, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Ashley Rojas. I'm a software and web developer for Local Contexts. There's not much else that I need to add, I feel, but I am calling from Wappinger homelands in what's also known as Connecticut in the United States. So it's lovely to be here with you all and talk a bit more about the implementation of the labels and notices into different platforms. Thanks.
Kia ora, Ashley. So just a brief overview, it's really looking at what is local context, or who are we really, and what are the labels and notices with examples. Ashley is going to show you the implementation steps. I know everybody is dying to know how to do the doing. So she's going to help with the implementation, and then we'll finish off with some questions and some answers. Local context really started in 2010 as an intervention to bring Indigenous cultural authority and data sovereignty back into cultural heritage. Spaces like museums, archives, libraries, galleries, universities, because many policies of these institutions in Aotearoa since 1856 proclaimed Māori as the dying race. Issac Featherston wrote, the Māoris are dying out. Our plain duty as good, compassionate colonists is to smooth down their dying pillow. Then history will have nothing to reproach us with. If we want to get to the core of the problem, that is the problem that we are really, really addressing here on intervention. So iwi are seen as invisible, as insignificant in the 1800s, and as the pathway to all that cultural heritage spaces by the colonists is to form policies that we are the dying race. And so no wonder then that repositories have no iwi data or little iwi data and policies around iwi data sovereignty. And to counteract the narrative really is, it means iwi have no right, that countering of that narrative is iwi have no rights, cultural heritage spaces to collect as much about iwi, bring everything together, which you're at a museum and you can see who we are as iwi, that we are becoming that extinct, like the moa. So which is why metadata policies don't need to have provenance, protocols, permissions, or that we are in the situation of IP law, who owns a language, who owns everything around intellectual property. So there is this narrative that keeps on really perpetuating the approach of the dying Māori narrative. Now, traditional knowledge labels were created through the partnership of Indigenous communities around the world as a tool that is a part of this intervention. And they're followed by the notices, and as an innovation, they're followed by the notices, and then the biocultural labels came after the notices. So local context really started in New York University with Jane Anderson, Waikato University with Maui Hudson, but in 2022 became an independent non-profit organisation registered under Navajo Nation. So as part of that transition to a non-profit, we established as an Indigenous-led council, which will continue to grow, and have brought on the founding executive director, Dr. Stephanie Runninghawk-Johnson, to lead the team through these exciting new phases as a registered under Navajo Nation. So just to see where our connections are through local context, this world map really helps to understand globally the Indigenous communities, institutions, researchers that we have using the local context hub, and Ashley will discuss what the hub is shortly. And our connections really are strong in North America, the Pacific, Oceania, where our team is mainly based. And we are largely been working in English, but supporting other languages as other geographical areas start to really grow. Just briefly, what do I mean by Indigenous communities, institutions, researchers? Researchers, you know, which are mainly most of you, individuals conducting research or generating data that tells a story about who they are collecting information on. The researchers that we really work with, linguistics, biodiversity, history, and even in law. There are service providers. They are really those of the repositories that hold the metadata for institutions. The institutions are those that are collecting Indigenous data or cultural heritage. And there are also Indigenous institutions. Indigenous communities, of course, is iwi, hapu, tribes, sub-tribes, and First Nations, who have a collective sovereign groups, ancestral ties to the land, and natural resources that they live, occupy, or have been displaced from their lands. So these communities have similar concerns and experiences that come out of colonisation. So the biggest problems we are really trying to address here with local context is really around the enormous collection of tangible and intangible cultural material knowledge that are held in repositories, but significantly have no provenance to iwi or hapu. The policies that are around that, and which means that iwi are largely not legal rights holders to this. There's misinformation, misattribution that continues to affect iwi, or even the ability to find the information and reassert control of the narrative, especially from 1856 here in Aotearoa. So then researchers are collecting data and samples from iwi that ever before, and then at a click of a button through our systems, this misinformation and misattribution is really pushed through systems quickly in seconds. So not being legal rights holders, not being able to control the narrative, and aside from all of this, really, it's just that big and open data have mistakes about who we are as iwi, and that just keeps going throughout the systems and repositories and the narrative. So these are the issues that iwi face, and really it's that intervention that we're really looking at. And we're looking at the narrative of, we're still here. We're looking at that narrative. We're trying to change that narrative. And how we do that at local context, the labels really developed over the 10 years with Indigenous communities as the labels correctly first being produced is that it's a tool. They're markers, they're digital tags, and we have seen them being used digitally in collections, catalogues, archival records, apps, websites, and I'm going to show you some examples shortly. We also have the notices. So the notices are for institutions and for researchers. Those are tools too that do the exact same thing, except they're wanting to look at disclosing interest by placing a notice, and then Indigenous communities are really wanting to reinforce rights by applying traditional knowledge and biocultural labels. So the traditional knowledge and biocultural labels, we have an opportunity to add appropriate provenance, protocols, and permissions. It's really giving voice to who we are. We are really looking at the consistency of our own tikana and governance that we have in terms of looking at provenance, protocols, and permissions. So you see here that we have 30 labels altogether. 20 of them are traditional knowledge labels, and 10 are biocultural labels. And each of the labels have a really different purpose, and the labels are really designed to be flexible so that the iwi can really give voice to what it is that they feel that the labels are. And as you can see, when you look closely at a few of the examples of the labels, Some are more specific than others, labels being applied across collections, for instance, while certain labels are really applied for more specific items or data. The labels really in those three categories, provenance, where something comes from, protocols, how it should be accessed, and permissions, how it should be used and now and in the future. So just to go over really what a label example is, we have the provenance label, which is the TK multiple communities, which kind of means that all this data can be used by not just one iwi, but many iwi. And that these multiple communities, they have that responsibility of kaitiakitanga, guardianship, and or ownership over specific materials. There's the seasonal, TK seasonal as a protocol example, and this label really is about connecting knowledge and land. And the community will use this label, or iwi will use this label if there are seasonal associations with the material. So for example, a certain song or some stories are really told at a particular time of the year. There is a permissions label, which is the TK non-commercial, and community uses, iwi uses this label when they would like the material to only be used for non-commercial purposes. Although the TK and the BC labels have versions of a non-commercial label, of a commercial label as well, if they're wanting to make sure that they're a part of being open to commercialization. So then the label customization by iwi is that we're looking at the TK attribution, which is a provenance label. The three main parts of this is the icon itself. It stays the same, so that is, you can see that all over the global situation. That the icon really shows up. It's very clear what it means. The title itself is used as a template, and iwi can use their own language and names for the title. And the third part is the description, and that's a template text that you see there, but iwi can use the text as is, or they can insert their name and where appropriate, and they can write their own version of this description based around the provenance of attribution and how they want to be named. An example here, we have whakatohea, the whakatohea TK labels on the Waiata app. We have there an example of their waiata, and then each waiata has a collection of labels, and then opening up a label of the verified, for example. Kua mana is the title, the icon is still there, and this is the description of what they've written in the verified TK label. So you get to see that they've chosen different labels at different songs based on the content. And this is what's really important, is that a lot of metadata may be missing the context and the content. The content is really important, and the context is really important to understand what voice iwi can give based on both of those, the content and the context. Where waiata has so much context that you can put the different types of labels on them, which Te Whakatohea have done here. So I'm just going to check, Ashley, if you can put the links into the chat of the Waiata app, that you can get this in Apple, and you can also get this in Google Play. Ashley will drop those links in there to see for your exact self. There is a version you can get. If you're not part of Te Whakatoa, there's a version you can get on both of those stores. So that's a really great example of Te Whakatoa. And this is one of Te Roroa. You will all be really, really excited here. Max, I know that you're out there. I'm so glad that you're here. We just love this example with Te Roroa, Victoria University, and the work that Max and his team has done here. And in terms of being a researcher, such as Fern Donovan, who has done the relationships right from the beginning in terms of being with Te Roroa and Fern have really done this thesis proud, as to put the provenance label of Te Roroa on the front page of her thesis. Everyone's going to be talking about this example for years and years and years and years to come. Ashley will put the link in the chat where to find Fern's thesis, and where you can see that example right at the front there. But we're so grateful with Victoria University, and it's just opened up a world of opportunities on how to really have those relationships with Te Roroa, with iwi Te Roroa, as well as to give voice to Te Roroa on the thesis. So congratulations, Max and the team. So grateful for that example. I'm just going to kind of shift here to a library example, one of the biggest library examples that we have, the first library example with the Passamaquoddy wax cylinders and the Library of Congress, and how Passamaquoddy and the Library of Congress had a relationship in order to really change the record at the metadata level with the TK labels, and really bring to life that metadata in such a way that Passamaquoddy have their labels right at the top, front facing, right next to the title, and that it gives attribution to Passamaquoddy, even though this the rights to the war songs and the Jesse Walks Fuchs collection for Passamaquoddy really held different rights. So having this example right at the front with the war songs themselves really puts the traditional knowledge labels in a position of showing cultural authority for Passamaquoddy. And so we're really, when you look at the rights that were given to the Peabody Museum and Harvard University, which was right at the bottom, they put the rights advisory in the rights advisory field, they put the traditional knowledge labels from Passamaquoddy before the rights of Peabody Museum. Now, and going through the years, and this takes years, and this is a really a great example in terms of the voice for Passamaquoddy, is that Harvard University really started to think differently about their rights on this and leave the rights to Passamaquoddy by taking away that rights information, which no longer is there. And we've got a link to show where the Library of Congress information is too, and their website is. So just really looking at now, moving from iwi communities to the institution and researchers and the data repositories, the responsibilities really is to disclose, to understand the collections that you have about iwi, understand the policies that you have around those collections, and start to look at the notices. Really, the notices are very, very, very clear and just engaging and putting out this energy of engaging and disclosing what you have, whether that's missing information or not. It's just a matter of getting that information out there by knowing what you collect and hold. So the notices can help with the labour really involved, the work with iwi back into institutions, into researchers who often have a really great familiarity with the data and the materials that they hold. And then the notices as tags are labelling Indigenous data and collections, and they're really designed to be flexible. The notice could be used on the website, on a collection database, or more specifically on a single item, cultural heritage, or data set. So there are 3 categories here, and we have the open to collaborate, which is at that kind of collection level. We're open to collaborate with our whole collections, a certain collection. An engagement notice, and then disclosure kind of gets a little bit more information. We're starting to look at context and content as being really important. This content might be specific to a specific song, traditional knowledge that we've sort of seen, and then we're also seeing there's attribution that's incomplete around those disclosure notices. So really, you can sort of understand the content a little bit more and sort of says, okay, yeah, traditional knowledge notice would be great to be put onto this collection or these items. And so we've got although we've got the collection care notices, we're developing this in the last past year or so with the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indians, where they're creating collections in a physical storage steward space, which is kind of outside of the communities, but is situated next to how to look after the collections. Unlike the other notices, these notices are really designed to be printed and to physically label collection spaces, and are used for consultation really with iwi and communities. So we have examples of the engagement notice and a disclosure notice, but we wouldn't have examples of the collection care notices because that's internal. It's internal for the institution. So the notice is very similar. Keep the icon the same, not to change that, not to change the title, and really the description is really to keep that kind of the same too, to stay in the same encouragement and explanation and information to accompany. Really the notice is that it's sort of saying what the title and the icon is. So they become really good markers for showing the Indigenous collections or the iwi collections that you really store and hold for the institutions. So really what we're wanting to say here is that institutions implement the notice and iwis really apply the labels. And the key is still about building relationships for this work to happen. An example of the open to collaborate engagement notice is the University of Tasmania Library engagement open to collaborate. They have done the icon, the title, and the text. And Ashley will put that link in the chat, so you can see that example of how they're using that in their library. A really great example here, especially for you of researchers, is with the archives and manuscripts, is that the TK notice by Leanne Wilson and Rose Barrowcliff on their article is to really look at the traditional knowledge that was in the article itself. Again, getting to the content, and looking at the content in such a way that traditional knowledge is definitely in here by Bajara, and that Rose and Leanne wanted to make that really clear with the TK notice. I'm going to hand it over now to Ashley, and she can talk about the local context hub.
Thanks, Janette. Just to talk about a bit about the hub and what it is. I know you've heard us mention it before. So the hub is the tool or platform that we developed to facilitate the application of labels and notices. So on the hub, Indigenous communities can customize and apply their traditional knowledge and biocultural labels to their own materials and those that are stored elsewhere. The community account is for those Indigenous groups, local communities that might be represented by a cultural center, TIPO here in the United States, land department within iwi or tribe, and so on. Institution and researchers working with Indigenous collections and data can generate and apply notices and notify communities about any relevant collections and data. So the institution account differs from the researcher account in that there can be more than one person in it, while the researcher account is just for an individual that's conducting research, gathering data, or publishing. They can apply the notices on that data or material themselves, and the institutions can apply the notices on that data or materials themselves. And the institution account is meant for organizations, which could be a university or a library within a university, or so on. And the last account type, which will actually be coming in January, is a service provider account. So this new account will include companies that offer platforms like databases and collections management systems that will not be utilizing the notices or labels themselves, but have built a connection into the hub, a connection to the hub into their platform, so that their customers can more easily apply the notices and labels. And I'll get a little bit more into that connection later on. So when an institution or researcher or community account has items that they would like to indicate contain Indigenous knowledge or would like to apply their voice to, they would create a project in the hub. And so this project is meant to describe what a notice or label is being applied to. So in the images here, we see a project being created by an institution. So the institution selects which notices they feel would apply best to the scope of this project. They can select one or multiple notices, as well as different translations that we have. Aside from English, we have Spanish, French, and Te Reo Māori. And the scope of the project, it can be anything, really. Anything that contains Indigenous knowledge that would be associated within this particular project. So it can be an individual item, a collection of items, a database input, a repository object. It can be anything that fits within that category. And just a note on that, the hub itself is not a data repository. It's meant to just refer to the data and materials that are held outside of the websites. So in your own database, collection, management software, and so on. But the project metadata here that's added would be a title, a brief description about what that scope is. So in this case, for the institution, it would be detailed enough that when they notify a community of this project, the community knows what it's in reference to. So when they go to apply their labels, they have a better understanding of what the labels are going to be applied to. So if it's a single item, maybe there's a URL added to wherever that item is being held. If it's a collection, maybe it's a search link that shows all the items within that collection that pertain to this project, and so on. It can include a contact person for anyone that's interested in contacting about this project, as well as additional identifiers such as DOIs or accession numbers or anything relevant to the project that the person creating the project would like to add. And there's a newer feature that we've added, which includes the addition, the ability to add a boundary to indicate where the project scope is situated. So right now with the boundary option, it includes the option to search through a native land digital database. And I can send the link for that application as well, or to upload a shapefile. So it is a work in progress, the boundary option. So if you utilize this and you have any suggestions, please let us know. But it's one way that we are working towards being able to include, locality when it comes to these projects, so that even if there's an institution or researcher that creates a project that doesn't know thanks Janette, that doesn't know the community that these objects belong to, hopefully having that boundary information would be able to help the community find those items as well, and then apply labels to them. Okay, and then for the next slide, thanks. Here's an example that's showcased in our latest film. It's another instance of the labels being applied by Ngāti Maru. So Manaki Whenua Land Care Research is a research institution in Aotearoa. They have biological collections of national significance and at a large scale, represented by over 671,000 specimen records, which are available on their online database. The BC notice was implemented by Manaki Whenua across their, I believe, 5 collections, which encompasses all of those items. They were able to do this by creating a project on the hub for each collection. That's how they decided to make that scope. If they wanted to do just one project for their entire institute, they could have done that as well, but it's based on what they would like to how they would like to separate things out. And they utilized our API, or application program interface, which just allows the 2 platforms to communicate. And they use that to connect their database to the hub. So when a project is created in the hub, a unique ID number is generated, and that's what's used to pull the information on the project, like any labels or notices associated with that project, into another platform. So most of Manaki Whenua's samples are geolocated, and because of that, they were able to identify over 1,000 specimens that were collected from, for example, the Rohi of Ngāti Maru, and create a project in local contexts, which they then, a separate project in local contexts, just for those items, which they then notified Ngāti Maru of. And then Ngāti Maru, within their community account, were able to go into the hub, customize their own labels, and apply their labels to that project. So in this case, as you can see, they applied 2 of their labels to the Manaki Whenua project, the BC Provenance and the BC Consent Verified. So Ngāti Maru decided to apply these 2 labels across all of those specimens that within that project that are collected from their lands. And with those labels, they're indicating the provenance of the materials as being from their lands, and that the materials were collected with consent. Now, this, so the Manaki Whenua example is an example of a human readable addition of the labels and notices into an object or a website, right? But that doesn't necessarily indicate what the database that holds those specimens has. Like, how do they store the labels or notices into that metadata? So one option that is to use already existing fields that are standard across all databases. So similar to title or author creator fields. And the most common field that the labels or notices have been added to across systems has been the rights field. So that's the top example that you see there. The rights fields tend to be a standard field across many systems, though may not always be the best fit for the labels or notices, which deal with Indigenous rights, but are extra legal. They're not legally binding or enforceable by law. So because of this, some individuals have opted to using their own custom created fields to add the labels and notices to if they're able to. So the example of the first two here is actually that earlier example from the Library of Congress, where they decided to do both. They put the labels and notices, well, in this case, just labels, into the rights advisory field, as well as creating a traditional knowledge labels field within their JSON metadata. And that's pretty interesting because even though the custom fields or even using a rights field, sometimes that information may not follow through properly. So for custom fields, if the data is being pulled in by another repository or another person looking to use that data, it may drop out any custom fields that don't map properly. So by using the rights field, the Library of Congress knows that even if this information is pulled elsewhere, rights will probably always be staying with the object, with the data, but custom fields may not. And so until a space for Indigenous voices is standardized within metadata spaces, if the rights field isn't the best fit, another solution would be to utilize already existing fields that specify how some of the items can be used. So that's the example that's there at the bottom. It's an example from a plugin that's being used by archives that was created for ArchiveSpace, which is I believe US-based repository, data repository, using MARC metadata structure. So instead of solely using the structure's equivalent of a rights field, the developer that created this plugin mapped each of the notices and labels into fields that more closely represent the intent of the notices and labels. And in addition to that, aside from MARC record, that's one example that we have. We are currently working on mappings in other metadata structures, such as schema.org or JSON link data. And those are just ways that we're trying to more easily allow for space for the labels and notices within different metadata structures. And that allows for greater control over the application and use of Indigenous data and Indigenous knowledge for the collective benefit. And that's pretty much it. If you're not sure where to get started from here, we have a lot of suggestions to get started and building on this momentum. And we can add a few links in the chat as well. Please definitely, if you're interested, visit our website to learn more about the labels and notices and the work that we do. We also have a few short films, one of which does highlight the Manaki Whenua example. And we have lots of regional networks and working groups if you're interested in any of them. And of course, information and hub demo sessions as well, if you would like to learn more.
Kia ora. Thank you, Ashley. Don't you love it? Don't you just love it when she talks metadata? I love listening to Ashley when she talks metadata, because at that machine level, it's making a change for Indigenous data sovereignty to actually be a part of the code. So that's what I love. So I love that stuff. So yeah, any questions, queries, comments? Were there any questions in the chat that came up?
I will add, I tried to be a little bit, when it came to the metadata stuff, a bit overview, some specifics. So if there's any questions about what is any of this or more specific questions that you have, I am happy to answer on either side of that spectrum.
Thanks, Ashley. Thank you, Mandy. We really appreciate that. Kia ora, Max.
I have a question if no one else is waiting. I was just thinking that it's obviously a huge amount of work that's gone into this with your team, and I was wondering like what's been the most like challenging part to overcome or to figure out, or maybe something that like other people wouldn't expect that it's been a real challenge.
That's a really good question. Thanks. Juliet, was that you?
Yeah, Juliet. Yeah.
How did Juliet? Ashley, did you want to go first?
I can only speak from the kind of implementation side of it, just because that's where I've been more situated. Like I've mentioned, the big issue with the implementation has been the rigidity of a lot of systems. You know, the Indigenous voices were not thought of when a lot of these, you know, platforms were created. And it really only has space for those like kind of Western you know, information. So it has been a bit of a struggle figuring out where these items can be placed, whether it's front facing like the websites, let's say. You know, we made it a point to say we would like the labels, the notices too, but really the labels to sit at the top of every web page, as close to the data as possible, as opposed to just being stuck at the bottom as an add-on, because that really is the first marker of there's Indigenous knowledge here. And then in the, you know, the database side, the metadata, like I said, only rights is really the field that people have been able to utilize for the most part. But it really doesn't relay a lot of the intent that the labels are meant to relay. And so that has been the major struggle that I've seen in that side of things. So.
Thank you, Ashley. That's really interesting. I can definitely see that there would be, you know, multiple things going on with that. So yeah, it's definitely a big lot of work that you've all done.
Thanks,
Great
Julie.
stuff.
I can look at it from the relationships perspective here. Relationships are always going to be the most important parts when it comes to being with iwi and institutions and researchers and repositories, as those relationships that need to be built. And as well as looking at your policies, what we're trying to do is the policy meeting the practice meeting the policy, and I'm talking to academics here, so we're all related to policy and practice, and getting that that connections through relationships. It will always come down to relationships and how you build those relationships in order to have the labels come through the technology, through the hub, can happen in seconds. The labels can be put up in seconds, but it's the relationship building that actually takes the time. It's understanding your policies. It's really looking at institutions, looking at their collections of what they have. Then it's looking at the metadata and the fields. So it's comprehensively understanding right from the beginning of policy right through to practice and implementation. I see those as exciting. I find them exciting, and more than anything in terms of being challenges. And I'm really grateful. We have a wonderful team at Local Context to help with all those levels of ensuring that we look after the labels and the notices for iwi going forward too. Kia ora, thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thanks.
In the chat, I saw someone, Donna, you said that you can't wait to apply the labels and notices, but the challenge is to get the word out to our researchers. I will add a link. So we're always happy to help. I mean, I know we have info and demo sessions, but aside from that, we do have some resources available as well. One-pagers, quick kind of informational things that are easy to kind of get people started, if that helps. And if you ever wanted to have one-on-ones with us, our support email is always available as well, to let us know what you are interested in, and we are more than happy to set up time to meet with you or your researchers or other constituents that are interested. Even if it's just to explain more about this, because we know it's a lot, but it is a lot of work to kind of get through. So always happy to help with that.
That's a really great point. Thanks, Ashley. I just want to bring up what Deborah's discussing there in terms of standardizing the metadata fields. Ashley, can you talk a little bit more about the technical implementation group?
Yeah, we one of our working groups that we have is the technical implementation working group. We try to meet quarterly, and it's really where we've been trying to get more into the weeds of how do we implement the labels and notices kind of standardized across different metadata structures. So we've had a few discussions on Darwin Core metadata structures, and just trying to kind of think through the structures that have already been mapped out, like MARC and EAD record structures. And now that we're doing schema.org and JSON linked data, trying to figure out what is still needed in many different areas of the world, and what can be that kind of standard that we utilize for the labels and notices. One thing that's kind of stemmed out of that, or maybe parallel to that working group, was the development of the Indigenous metadata bundle. So it's a proposal to have such a bundle utilized across different metadata structures. So we're kind of trying to, get that started and situated to have that space within different structures, just as a standard, just like rights, just like any other standard field across different places.
Thanks,
That sounds fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Max, are you just able to just come out for a minute or two and just talk about digital NZ? You're right, Deborah, really, let's just copy those that are doing it. Are you there, Max?
Yes, I'm here.
Thanks, Max.
So I guess you've heard that we've done some of this work, and I'd firstly say how it wasn't really a technical challenge for us to integrate with Local Context because of all the awesome examples and the documentation on their website. So I think you'll probably find that side of it not too hard. But when we were trying to get, say, our repository to, put this data into the OAI feed for other people to pick it up, that's where we had some issues. So I think it's important to kind of lean on, places like Crossref to get them to support this. Talk to you if you're with a vendor, talk to them. So Digital NZ did come to the party, and they just did a manual update for the record that we have with this metadata. But they're now thinking about what happens if we get more. And I think that's where, if we come together and we're all doing it in a similar way, it's easier for them as well. So yeah, I'd recommend that you check out the talk with Fern and Tauho from Aotearoa, because they have some really good comments around what universities can do as well. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Thanks, Max. I really do appreciate it. And I'm so grateful you come out and really support the whole kaupapa the way you do. It's just absolutely amazing. Just kind of finishing off, save the chat with the 3 dots at the top there, because I know we put a lot of links in there for Anton and the team. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. Really appreciate the amazing work that Ashley does as the awesome API expert that she is. And really thank you to everyone for listening to us. And we really look forward to you implementing all the labels and notices that you have coming to you in your institutional repositories. Ngā mihi atu ki a koutou katoa, mauri tu, mauri ora. Kia ora.